and Gishmak on the day that they took it off the shulchan as the day that they put it on. Oh, Gavaldik, thank you so much, Mali. Appreciate it. Oh, Gavaldik. Let me just put this over here. That doesn't. Okay, which takes us to the Tepuk Lei Mishum Tzipui. The Gemara tells us, the Mishnah tells us that the Shulchan was able to become Tameh because it was a kliyot that you could move around, and it says it has to be there Talmud. The lechem apadim has to be lefanai Talmud, meaning you cannot move it around. So because of that, they announced, please nobody touch the Shulchan so that it shouldn't become Tameh, so that they shouldn't have to deal with the crisis of having to toivel the menorah, thereby eliminating the Talmud. Frek Gemara, v'tepuk lei mishum tzipui. So Rashi says, v'tepuk lei, the mekabel tumah, v'afiluhu asur l'nachas. The Gemara had a kasha before. Maybe the Shulchan is a kliyetz ha'asur l'nachas. It's a kliyetz that's not made to move around. And because it's not made to move around, it's not mekabel tumah. So even though we've already eliminated that kasha, the Gemara is going back to attack that kasha. And the Gemara is asking, what's the kasha l'chatchila? Even if the wood of the shulchan would not be mekabel tumah, but the shulchan is covered with gold, so that gold should be mekabel tumah. The table mishum tzipui. So Rashi show matkis, the cover of the shulchan is made out of metal. The chlimatkis la iskis l'sak. This halacha that you have to be compared to a sack, meaning it has to be able to be carried around, whether it's full or empty, that applies to many different types of materials, but it does not apply to metal. That's non we learned. Hashulchan, the shulchan, ba'adolfaki. Adolfaki Rashi says is a kisei hamiskapel umuchusa or. It's a chair that folds up and it's covered with or. We learned about a adolfaki not too long ago, which was referring to a cot, like a portable bed. And this mission is in Caleb. Shenifchasu, they broke, parts of them were missing. Oy shechipan b'shayish, or they were completely covered over with marble, and marble is rock. And Rashi says, any Caleb made out of rock will not be mekabel tumah. But instead of covering them completely over with rock, or instead of this keli being completely broken, but v'shayir bohem makam hanachas koisos, there is still place on this keli that is mekabel tumah, that's large enough to hold koisos. So Rashi v'shayir bohem so there's still some of that original keli intact that's also mekabel tumah. So the halach is, the Mishnah says tamei, it will be tamei. Rashi says shadayin royu l'malachta rishayna. The original keli that's mekabel tumah is still usable for what its original intent was, to hold food. From Yudoimer, you need a little bit more of available space on this table that remains. You need makam hanachas chatichas. Rashi says tzarich af hanachas chatichas lechem u'basar, not just to put some cups down, but also to put some dishes. The Eloi, and if you don't have enough space from the original keli, then lav shulchanhu. It's not considered to be a shulchan, and therefore it won't be tamei. Alma, but what you do see from here is the fact that they covered it over with marble eliminates its ability to become tamei. Alma tzipuyav mevatloi afilu. In this case of the Mishnah in Kalim, the fact that the rock that covers over this chair or this table overwhelms the actual keli is a kula, because it makes it that it should be tar, because rock is not mekabel tumah. Kol shekain, on the other way around, if the cover to our shulchan is made out of gold, kol shekain, because of that cover, it should be mekabel tumah. So if a cover could make something not be mekabel tumah, surely a cover should make something be mekabel tumah. Let me just finish Rashi. What do you say, Modi?
I don't hear the story. The reason why it's not funded is because people will cut.
No, it's not Mechabel Karka. What's Mechabel Karka? It's a table. It happens to have covering of rock. The Gemara's kasha was that the Shulchan Aruch Mechabel Karka, it's a Kli Ha'asl Nachas. That doesn't mean it's not, the Kli Ha'asl Nachas is not, the reason why it's not Mechabel Tumah is not because it's Mechabel Karka. It's not Mechabel Tumah because there's a Gzeres HaKasuv that in order for these types of kalim, such as wood, to be Mechabel Tumah, it has to be movable. It has to be something that you move around. That's a separate thing from
the way. Normally the chair is the table would be covered. Right? So it doesn't make a difference if it's covered in gold or it's not covered in gold. Even without the gold, it would have been covered. Because it's the Sura Lavachas.
But the whole rule of a Sura Nachas doesn't apply to metal. The rule of a Sura Nachas applies to wood, doesn't apply to metal. So since it applies to wood, not to metal, as long as it's classified as a wooden keli, I agree. But now that we're saying you classify a keli by its cover, even to be mekel, so you should surely classify. In other words, in the Goy Shevel to say don't judge a book by its cover, but in the Yisrael they said judge a table by its cover, and its cover is if its cover is Makabel Tumah, it'll be Makabel Tumah. Oh, very good, thank you, perfect. Zok to Gemara, the typical Mishum Tzipur. So we're really going back to sort of beat a dead horse because we've already answered and dealt with the shaila of Kli Eitz Ha'asl Nachas. But nevertheless, the Gemara wants to know how could you have originally, even your kasha has to be in Gans and Oiskalten. So your whole kasha was never a kasha because the metal covering to the keli would be tamei even if it's Lo Yasl Nachas. I'm sorry, even if it's Asl Nachas. So it nan be learned. Ha'shulchan v'adolfik yishnivchas ha'shechip in Peshayis, B'shayar b'makas ha'nachas koshis tamei, v'yidam b'makas ha'nachas chatichas. When do you say that the marble in the Mishnah Kalim is Mavatal Keli is because the frame of the Keli wasn't made out of anything significant. So sure, a stone will be Mavatal. But Atzei Shitim, which are expensive wood, that might be more chashuv. And even if it's covered with metal, even if it's covered with gold, we don't say that it's a gold cover, it's a gold shulchan. We say it's an Atzei Shitim shulchan, because Atzei Shitim is a choshev type of wood. So that might be an argument, and therefore it still would not be Makabel Tumah, even though it has a covering of gold. So it would modify it. Is that sometimes you could judge a book by its cover, and sometimes you can't judge a book by its cover. It depends on how good the book is. So Hani Chalavish Lakish, the Amar Laishanu Elabechli Achsalgim, Haboy Mudin Sayam. Basically, according to Rish Lakish, who learned Pshat in the Mishnah Kalim, in fact, that it depends on the material, on the wood of the Iker Keli, that if it's a cheaper wood, yes, then the fact that it's covered over with rock, we ignore the Keli, we look at the rock, and therefore the Keli is not Makabel Tumah. But Rish Lakish, if the wood that was used, the framework that was used is very high-end wood, very valuable wood, even if it's covered with rock, we look at it still like it's a wooden keli, because the wood is very, very expensive. So that would make sense here as well. The wood that was used for the shulchan was very expensive. Even though it's covered with gold, it'll still retain its classification as a wooden shulchan. According to Rabbi Yochanan, we don't care what the actual shulchan is made out of. It doesn't make a difference. The cover is the cover, and that's what we look at. How are you going to explain our shulchan? What's your kasha that the shulchan shouldn't be Makabel Tumah? It has a metal covering, it's plated in gold. And if you want to say it all depends on the covering. What is tzipu oimed? It's actually a shaila in the Rishonim. But Rashi says tzipu she'eino oimed means if the plating is nailed down and fastened very well down to the keli, then you'll say that you look at the gold. But if it's tzibur she'eino oimed, so we'll say we will say that the plating that was put onto the shulchan was tzibur she'eino oimed, and therefore, I guess it could slide off. It wasn't fastened down, and therefore we will not look at the shulchan as a golden kli. We look at it as a wooden kli because the plating isn't so adhered to it. So Zok the Gemara, Bechitim the Kambetibu Oimid. Kambetibu Sheina Oimid. This is how Rashi learns. This was also discussed in the discussion that Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan had regarding the Mishnah in Kalim. And this question was, B'tzipi Oimid or B'tzipi Sheina Oimid? This that you, Rabbi Yochanan, said that tzipui is what we look at, is that even by a tzipui she'eina oimid or even by a tzipui oimid. Does it have to cover the side of the table, or b'she'eina chayfes levavs levavs, or maybe it only has to cover the tabletop? Well, Amrlei, and Rabbi Yochanan responded, Lo yishna b'tzipui oimid, v'lo yishna b'tzipui she'eina oimid, v'lo yishna b'chayfes levavs levavs, regardless, the shulchan is bottled to the cover. So if regardless the shulchan is bottled to the cover, so then it's a metal cover, it's a golden cover, and it should be mekabel tuma. El shiny shulchan, the rachmana karya eitz. The reason why we're going to say that we ignore the metal is the shulchan is different, because the Torah said that it's called shulchan eitz. The Torah referred to the shulchan as a shulchan eitz, even though it's covered. It says as follows, and this is in the pasuk. This is in the pasuk in Novi. It's in the pasuk in Yecheskel describing the Beis Hamikdash. Hamizbech eitz shalish amos gavoya, ve'orkoi shtayim amos. This is of course speaking about the mizbeach. Umiktza'osav loy, ve'orkoi v'kiroisav eitz. And then it says at the end of the pasuk, "V'yidaber Elai zeh shulchan asher lifnei Hashem." So the pasuk is a little difficult to understand. Is we talking about the mizbeach or is it talking about the shulchan? But nevertheless, the Torah clearly refers to the shulchan as a shulchan eitz. So therefore, even though normally when something has a metal cover, you might look at it as a kli of matkas, as a kli of metal, the shulchan is special because the Torah specifically said that it's eitz. So now the Gemara is going on a tangent. This is an unusual pasuk. Pasuk b'mizbeach. The Torah first started referring to the mizbeach, the same shulchan, and at the end, the pasuk just transfers over to be talking about a shulchan. What's pshat? Zok the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan bar Shlokish Amar Tevayu, Bizman shebeis hamikdash kayim. When we have the Beis Hamikdash, Mizbech mechaper al adam. What's mechaper on our averis? The mizbech is mechaper on our averis. We bring on it oilish and shlomim, so we bring on it chatas. That's where we bring all our karbanos. But achshav rechmon l'tzon that we don't have the Beis Hamikdash anymore. Shulchanai shalad mechaper alav. What's mechaper? The shulchan of a person. How does that work, Dr. Rashi? Be'achnosas archim. When we bring guests to our home, that's like we're bringing karbanos. Our Rebbeinu Shalom perceives guests that we bring to our home, that we take care of, just as he perceives karbanos. Rashi said, Tosfos adds, the gadol koyach halagima. Feeding a yid is a great schos. Zok tehelet gemar vayter. Kol hakelim shebemikdash yesh lahem shneim. They all have replacements, doubles and triples. Mizbeach and the choshes.
Sorry to interrupt. Which averis is it mechap? If it's b'shoigeg, the mazid, it's mechaper on the avoinus. Don't we bring them as the carbon for that?
I'm not sure. Which with Bizman Shebeis described the mizbech was mechaper. So it doesn't mean a carbon. I think he was asking, talking about carbon chatas, talking about carbon oila. Maybe he's talking about all carbonates. We also have the concept of the shalma param sefasenu, that when we say carbonates, it's as if we're bringing carbonates. So I'm not sure exactly how each component works, how every part plays, how every part plays its role in our kapara. The kasha is a good one. I don't have the answer. Okay, so let's go to Gemara. Says weiter. But that's not what our Gemara is referring to. Our Gemara is referring to the next shtickle, that it says that the mizbeach could not become tamei because the mizbeach the Torah refers to it as the Mizbech Adam. Zok the Gemara. Mizbech does not become Tomei because the Torah says Mizbech Adam Atasali. Mizbech and the Choshesh is the Chsiv, Mizbech Adam Atasali. But the Mizbech Hazav, the Torah doesn't say anything about. Mizbech Hazav, how do we know the Mizbech Hazav is also not Makabel Tumah? The Chsiv HaMenoira VaMizbechois. With one word, Mizbechois, the Torah is referring to two different Mizbech. Ishkis Mizbechois Elazeh. There's a Hekesh from the Mizbech, the Chitzon, which the Torah refers to as Mizbech Adama, to the Mizbech HaKtoiris, just like the Mizbech HaChitzon is not Makabel Tumah, so too the Mizbech HaKtoiris is not Makabel Tumah. The Chachamim Oimrim Mepnei Shem Etzupim. This was the last line of the Mishnah that we struggled to understand. The Chachamim said that the reason why the Mizbechas are not Makabel Tumah is because they're covered with either copper or gold. We just learned a minute ago that the fact that the shulchan was covered with metal would be a reason why it would be Makabel Tumah, right? Yet the Mishnah seems to be saying that the fact that it's covered with copper or gold is the reason why it shouldn't be Makabel Tumah. Even the Mitzupininu Mitamu. That's not a reason to say they're not Makabel Tumah. That's a reason to say that they are Makabel Tumah. Zok Gemara, you're 100% right. Ema v'chachamim Mitamu. Say that the Chachamim argue on the first time of the Mishnah. I forgot who that was. Rabbi Lozer. He argues on Rabbi Eliezer. The Chachamim argue on Rabbi Eliezer, and in fact they say that the Mizbechas do become Tamei, and they do become Tamei because they're Mitzupin. Ema v'chachamim Mitamu pnei shem Mitzupin. That's one shot. And that means they would have to toible the Mizbechas. Rabbanon Rabbi Eliezer Karmi. The Rabbanon were just adding to what Rabbi Eliezer said. Rabbi Eliezer said they're not Tamei because they're called Mizbech Adam. Ma da'atech mishum de mitzupin. Someone might ask a new Rabbi Eliezer that the Mizbechas should still be Makabel Tumah because they're covered with metal. And on that, Miftil bottle tzipui gabayu. We say that their tzipui is bottle, to the Mizbech. And therefore, we look at the wood, which is going to be the ikr. So Rashi, Miftil bottle tzipui gabayu, Rachmana kara eitz l'kuli. When the fact that the Torah referred to the Mizbech as eitz, uvelav hakra nami loy mekabutum. Without this pasuk, it wouldn't be Makabel Tumah anyway, because we say that so even without the Mizbech Adama, even without the pasuk of Mizbech Adama, the Mizbechas wouldn't be Makabel Tumah, because the Torah refers to the Mizbech as a Mizbech Shal Eitz, which means the Torah specifically is ignoring the covering. Okay, now that we spoke about the covering of the Mizbech, the Gemara leads into a grand finale for our Masech.
Yosy, I'd just like to address Akiva's kasher for a moment.
Please.
I think what Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish is saying that Shochano Shel Adam is Mechaper Olav. I think it's a generic way of saying that Maisim Tovim. Now that we don't have Karbonos to be Mechaper, all we have are Maisim Tovim, and that will serve to be Mechaper. So it's just it's not literally Shulchan Shel Adam, but it represents the idea of Maisim Tovim.
I hear, but probably Maisim in Chesed, taking care of another Eve.
That's right.
Because Tosfos refers to Lagimo. There's some benefit in feeding someone else.
On a practical basis, the data can be avoided.
It's going to burn. Oh, that's going to be the next sugya. That's going to be the next year. Why is the Mizbech burning up? Yeah. So you talk about mitzvahs and Maisim Tovim. There was a very famous story with a Rebbe and the Rebbetzin, and the Rebbetzin did not season the cholent very well. It was very, very bland, and the Rebbe wanted to add his own seasoning to give it some flavor. But she would be insulted if he's mixing into the kitchen and fixing up her cooking. So he would wait until she would be engrossed in her tehillim, and while she was engrossed in her tehillim, he would quickly go into the kitchen and season the cholent properly. So on Shabbos they served the cholent, and the guest said, "Wow, this cholent is delicious, Rebbe. How did it turn out so good?" So he says, "Between my wife's tefillis and my masam tovim, the gevar nagit the tune." Amar Rebbe Lozer, Talmidei Chachamim Ein or shall Gehenim shoyletus behem. The fire of Gehenim is not shoylet on Talmid Chacham. And most people learn how is this relevant to the sugi we just learned. It's because it was almost b'derech neis that you had this thin plating of gold on the mizbeach hazov, and you had this thin plating of nechoshes on the mizbeach hachitzon, and it didn't burn through for years and years and years. We had fire there, and it didn't burn through. So Amar Bavona Beloz Talmid Chachamim Ein Or Shel Gehenim Shalet B'Speh. The Or of Gehenim will not be shoylet in the Talmud Chacham. Kavod Chaymer Misalamandra. Kavod Chaymer from a salamander. Uma salamandra Shatoldas Eishi. The salamander is a toiled of Eish. What does that mean? Rashi says Chaya Hanivres from the Or. It's a Chaya that's created from fire. Kishaboyar in Eish b'mokum echad sheva shanim tamid b'li hefsek. If there's a fire that lasts 7 years without ever being extinguished, somehow out of that comes a salamander. Tosfos makes a point.
Right.
Yes.
I was wondering, like, there's a lot of repairs that went on in the base Mikdash. How do you know it wasn't replated?
Well, we're actually not talking about we're talking about the Mishkan, right? Because these mizbeches, the mizbech hazov wasn't the base Mikdash. I don't know. The Gemara is making that assumption, I guess.
Okay.
Tosfos makes it a point to tell us that it's a sheretz, a cheled ba'achbar tirgam yonison kachushtu v'salamandra. So Tosfos is saying that this is one of these shrotzim that are tomei. So kavachayim v'salamandra, uma salamandra. She told us Eishi. Nevertheless, hasach midama. If you smear its blood upon you, ein or shaletas play. Its blood is a fire repellent. Talmud Chacham or Talmidei Chachamim. Shekol guf onesh. Their whole guf is a shtik fire. D'chsiv alay koi devari keish. Ne'um Hashem halachas kama bekam. So first of all, what in the world is the Talmud Chacham doing in Gehenim in the first place? If he's such a big tzaddik, why is he in Gehenim? So there are Mefarshim who say, he's schlepping at his Talmidim. When the Talmud Chacham goes into Gehenim, he's going to schlep out his Talmidim. So even when he goes in, we had Rabbi Yochanan went and schlepped out Acher, right?
But not the lid for Rosh Hashiva.
Nachman, right? We have all the people.
But not the lid for Rosh Hashiva.
I told you so. Even he doesn't get burned when he goes into Gehenim.
He doesn't go in.
So that's what it's referring to. That's what it's
Isn't he the one that says, I told you so? He could.
Gewaltig. Okay, so that's the first halacha. Amar Shlokish, Ein Or Shel Gehenim Shoyletes b'Poishe Yisrael. The Or of Gehenim will not be shoylet on Poishe Yisrael, even those who do averis. Who are Poishe Yisrael? Tosfos right away tells us nearly the lava Poishe Yisrael b'Gufa. This can't be the real Poishe Yisrael who's full of averis. So I'm reading Rosh Hashanah. Poishe Yisrael b'Gufan Gehenim kala v'Heimenim kala. They're so bad they'll never get a kapara. Even there's not even enough Gehenim to service them. So our Gemara here is referring to a Poishe Tzaskamer. We're talking about people who are slight Poishim. They're not so bad. They're still bad. Since Avram pulls all of these people out of Gehenim, like Moti mentioned, he doesn't even get burned. Except for someone who's boiled akutis. That's what we're talking about. The Mamshech Arlasai, because he covers over his Arla, he tries to make his bris look like there's no bris. Kadimin b'reish oisin pasid, v'chiamin b'seib zav, kol yordan v'oil chutz mishloisha. And even though it also says in Perek Azov that everybody goes down and then comes up except for 3 people, lav b'gehenim mari el b'makam acher, lidoin, hein yordan. They're not going into Gehenim, they're going to some other place. V'afa nidin la'acher shnei masher chodesh, oilim, then yidudim yoyshim mishor atmima. So this is talking about the different types of levels. So the Poishes will go down forever. So we're speaking about people who aren't so bad. So Omer Shlokish, Ein Or Shel Gehenim Shaletes b'Poishe Yisrael, Kavachaymer mimizbech hazov. It's a kavachaymer from the mizbech hazov. Uma mizbech hazov. She'ein alav elak oived din azar. But only has a small, thin level. And Duvi asked the kasha. Maybe it was replated. So let's just look at Tosfos. Tosfos is not Tanchuma. Yesh shahaya Moshe Tmiya the Tchuma Yesh. In the Tchuma, there's a stickle that says, Moshe was amazed by how could this possible? How could this be possible? He asked Hashem, how is it that the Mizbech won't get damaged? And the Rebbeinu Shalom told Moshe, Kach darki v'eish shel mayla, eish oichla eish, ve'ena machala. K'dichsiv asnayin ukol. That's how my fire, shel mayla, that's how my fire works over here. Just like you saw by the burning bush. The fire didn't consume the wood. Don't worry about it. It's going to happen. So this is how we know that they weren't constantly replating it. Because in fact, the Medrash tells us that the layer of gold on the Mizbech Hazav was never printed. Mizbech Hazav, many years, Ein Ha'or Shalet Esboi, Posh Yisrael, Shemalei, and Mitzvahs Karimain. The Chib, Kepelach Harimin Rakosech, like the amount of, like the round of the Rimon is your head. So we'll stop here so that we can be beside with the seam that we're having in Wednesday night. There's a big public seam in Viewmont that everyone's invited to. So we'll be beside then. But the kasha is, why did the Gemara bring the raya from the Mizbech Hazov? Why didn't the Gemara bring the raya from the Mizbech Nechoshes? The Mizbech Nechoshes had even more fire than the Mizbech Hazov. So that the Mefarshim say that the Mizbech Hazov is softer. I hear. But there's another pshat to say. The Mizbech and the Choshes, the fire came down from Shemayim. It was an Eish Shel Nes. But the Mizbech Hazov, we learned in the Brais of Abai Mesader Seder Maracha, Aliba de Gemara, Aliba de Abashol, Mishmei de Gemara, Aliba de Abashol. We learned the Brais that they took burning coals. One of the first things they did was they took burning coals from the Maracha that was lit on the Mizbech and the Choshes, and they brought it to the Mizbech Hazov. That was man-made fire. So could be H Menat Shemayim, Ruchnistic fire, maybe that doesn't burn. But regular fire burns. And yet it didn't burn the Mizbech. The other question that they asked, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe asks this, he has a whole shtickle on this last sugi here. But he asks a couple of questions. First of all, Vos Epis, that the Talmud Chochem, we proved that in Orshal Gehenim Shoylat boy from a Sheretz Tmeya, from a Salamandra. And the Posh Yisrael Karimoin, from him we learn that the Eishal Gehenim is not showing him from the Mizbech Hazov. Wouldn't you want to compare the Talmud Chochem to the Mizbech Hazov? A. And B, the other question the Lubavitcher Rebbe asks is, how do we get into this whole thing? We got into this whole thing because we were discussing the fact that the Mizbech was plated. So if we're discussing the fact that the Mizbech was plated, wouldn't it make sense to first discuss the second shtickle where we're talking about the Mizbech Hazov, and then from there go on a tangent and talk about the Talmud Chacham like a Salamandria? So it's out of order. So I don't want to go through the whole shtickle from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, it's a little bit teeth, but I want to share another shot why we're comparing the Talmud Chacham to the Salamander and not the Mizbech. The teretz is very simple. The Talmud Chacham was Kulei Torah. We're comparing him to the Salamander because he himself is fire. He himself totally is not consumable by fire. That's a much bigger security. He's fireproof. Masha'enkein, the Posh Yisrael, sure he has a thin layer of protection, but he himself is ready to be consumed. He just has a protection around him. The Talmud Chacham is through and through fireproof. That's what someone wanted at a time. Okay, so we're almost finished Chagiga. Baruch Hashem, we were Zoycha to finish Seder Moed. We should be Zoycha to finish many more Sedorim. Mitoich Simcha, Mitoich Ashiris, Mitoich Naches, Mitoich Pernasa, Mitoich HaChavas Adas, Mitoich Yiddish Naches, and Yir Shemayim, and Kedusha V'Tahayim. And now we're going to start the subject of Noshim. Everybody knows Noshim are very difficult to understand, but we'll do our best. Right.
Where's the copper from?
From a copper mine. I don't know.
Dave, where's the copper from?
It didn't come from the Marsha Toivis.
It's the mirror.
No, that's the Kior. That's the Kior. That's the Kior, not the Mizbech. That was the Kior. Yes, the Kior came from the Marsha Toivis. I don't know. I remember that it was a Kior.
I remember all
okay.
all the copper. The divine grace directly
I hear.
Okay, and from there, you take the fire and go into the gold.
You go to the Zechpimi.
In terms of ourselves, okay, basically the only way we are able to function is at least get that from the women.
I hear.
They allow us to function.
Why everybody's too esoteric here? The bottom line is we're a mitzvah chagiga being sameach for women. So the Gemara is challenging. You think you understand what it means to be sameach for women? You don't understand how to be sameach for chagiga on your own, and for sure you can be sameach for women.
Gewaltig. So although Yevamos is a geschmack of Masechta Tzlomdish, but if you contemplate the reality of these situations, it's actually talking about something that's very tragic. So we'll focus on the academia because the actual mitzvahs and what leads to these things are very tragic. So the halacha is Rahman al-Islam, if someone is nifter without any children. So there's halacha of Yibum, which means that his brother is mechuyev to marry his wife. Normally, halacha is it's also to marry your brother's wife. It is a chiyuv kares if someone marries your brother's wife. But if a brother dies without children, there's a mitzvah of yibum, and that mitzvah of yibum creates an actual relationship. And the relationship that it creates between the brother who has to do the yibum and the woman who needs to be nisyabim is called a zika. The word to describe their relationship is called a zika. Unlike a marriage that gets dissolved with a get, a zika can only get dissolved with a process called chalitza, which we're familiar with. He puts on some type of shoe and she takes it off and she spits. She said, he doesn't want to rebuild the family of his brother. The halacha is that the only way someone is allowed to do yibum is if there are no other things preventing him from marrying his sister-in-law, other than the fact that it was his sister-in-law. Because the issur of his sister-in-law is waived in order to do the mitzvah of yibum. But no other isurim are waived in order to do the mitzvah of yibum. So for example, let's say that Reuven had a daughter Leah, and his daughter Leah married his brother Shimon. So now Shimon is married to Reuven's daughter, and Shimon is nifter without any children. So technically, Shimon's wife Leah, or Shimon's almana Leah, who happens to be Reuven's daughter, is now following her father Reuven. Of course, he's allowed to marry his brother's wife, but he's not allowed to marry his daughter. So therefore, he will be parted from evil, and she will be parted from evil, because there's an issue they're stopping. Where it gets a little bit complicated is polygamy. In those days, they had multiple wives. So let's say Reuben had a daughter Leah who married his brother Shimon, and Shimon had another wife who was completely unrelated to anybody. And once again, Rahman al-Islam, Shimon dies without children. So you might say Reuben cannot marry his daughter, but the other wife is fair game. Maybe he should make Yibum on the other way. So the halach is, we're going to learn from Sukkim that once he cannot do Yibum to one of the wives because of an Isser Arais, in this case, we're talking about the fact that one of the wives is his daughter, he's not allowed to do Yibum to the co-wife. The co-wife is referred to in our mission as a tzara. I have no idea why, but it's called a tzara. So therefore, not only can Reuven not do Yibum on his daughter, he cannot do Yibum on his daughter's tzara on the other wife that Shimon had.
There's multiple wives that are not related.
There can be 100 wives that aren't related. Since one of them, I'm sorry?
There's multiple wives.
No, because you only have to do one. You only have to do one. I don't think each woman is mechuyev in Yibum. I think there's only one. Because it's about him, not about her. It's lived in Shem Achiv.
One of the wives.
That's right. I believe so.
Same type of situation with the husband. So if Leah married his brother,
Reuben's daughter Leah married Shimon. Okay.
Shimon is the brother of
Shimon is the brother of Reuben.
Reuben. Okay. So if Reuben has another brother, because
So let's not go there. I don't want to get more complicated. I'm trying to keep it simple. I'm not looking to complicate. I'm looking to simplify. If I wanted to complicate, I could complicate everything. I'm trying to keep it very, very simple. We're going to get there. We're going to get there. We have to build one at a time. So now we're only doing Reuben and Shimon. Now I gave an example of the reason why Reuben couldn't marry Shimon's wife is because one of them was Reuben's daughter. But there could be 15 different reasons why Reuben couldn't marry one of the wives of Shimon. I picked the example that one of Shimon's wives was Reuben's daughter. But there could be many other reasons. And that's what the mission is going to list off. I don't want to get complicated. I want to stick to the simple facts. If one of the wives Reuben cannot marry, he cannot marry any of the wives. As a separate subject, there's many different reasons why Reuben wouldn't be able to marry any of the wives. But let's keep that as a separate component so that we don't get confused. And now we have to add the extra layer of complication that Dr. Golder brought up. And that is as follows. Reuben could not marry any one of Shimon's wives. The first wife he couldn't marry because it was his daughter. The second wife he couldn't marry is because once he cannot do Yibam on one wife, he cannot do Yibam on any wives. But now this second wife takes on a new Isser in and of herself. So now she's also, why is it relevant? There's nothing else happening. Well, what's relevant is what happened if Levi, which is what Dr. Golder brought up, Levi, which is a third brother, he could do Yibam because Shimon's two wives were not related to Levi in any other way, other than that they were Levi's sister-in-law. So Levi could do Yibam. So what if Levi did Yibam not by marrying Reuben's daughter, but by marrying the other wife, right? So, and then Levi dies without children. So now this other wife, who's completely separated from Reuben's daughter, because only she's the only woman married to Levi, Reuben's daughter, her ex-Sarah, is no longer married to Levi. Levi dies. Reuben can still not do Yibam on her, even though right now everything is perfect. She's completely a stranger. But once she was sort of blacklisted because she was once the co-wife of Reuben's daughter, she's blacklisted forever. But let me just take it one step further. And even if Levi had a second wife who had nothing to do with this whole thing, she's also going to be potter. And not only is she potter, she gets blacklisted as well. So if there's a fourth brother who she marries, she'll poison that as well. So even if Yaakov had 4,000 children, Reuben will never be able to do Yibam. I mean, he has other problems to get 4,000 children, but Yibam is not going to be one of them.
Shimon couldn't do Yibam, which falls to Levi.
Reuben could be
Reuben didn't do Yibam,
right?
which falls to his next brother.
Sure, yeah.
One of the brothers has to do Yibam.
Or Chalitza. That's right. That's correct. Okay, so let's see.
Which one does Chalitza? The last guy who said no, or the first guy who said no? Anyone?
Anyone does it.
Any of them?
Yeah. We're going to associate usually the oldest brother has the Zika, but Reuben doesn't have Zika at all.
Shimon went to Levi, the Zika kept passing.
Well, no, Shimon was able to make the Yibam.
But then he decided he also doesn't want to do it.
No, Shimon did it.
I'm saying okay.
Not Shimon. Shimon's dead. Levi did. Levi did it. Levi did it. So Levi did Yibam. No, Levi did Yibam.
Let's say he didn't.
If none of the brothers wanted to Yibam, one of them would have to do Chalitza.
One of them.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. It's not a chiyuv on it, specifically the older brother.
I don't think so.
If there's a problem with doing Yibam, you don't do Chalitza either.
That's correct. We're also going to know that Yibam and Chalitza travel together. You only do Chalitza if you would have a chiyuv to do Yibam. If there's an issue to do Yibam, then there's no Chalitza done.
Sorry,
Okay,
yes.
so now let's see. Yes.
So just one basic question. Do both the lady and the man have the right to refuse to do Yibam, or only one of them?
Only one of them. Only the man. Guess which one? Guess which one?
Okay.
Yeah, you could do Yibam Lakocha. Zog to Gemara. Chomesh Esrei Noshim Poitrus Tsarisayim. There's 15 women that are usher on the man. So basically, all of their rights listed in the Torah that Reuben may not marry. If Shimon is married to any one of them, Reuben will not be able to do Yibam. So Chomesh Esrei Noshim Poitrus Tsarisayim. Like we said, not only can Reuben not do Yibam with his daughter, he can't even do Yibam with any co-wife that his daughter had. It's Tsarisayim. If that co-wife ended up marrying Levi, and Levi had another wife, once again, Reuben will not be able to do Yibam on any of Levi's wives. Mina Chalitza, Mina Yibam. So this clarifies what Moti said. Sai from Chalitza, Sai for Yibam. Because if there's an Isser Yibam, there's no Chiyuv Chalitza either. It would go on forever. As many children as Yaakov wanted to have, all those children he would not be able to do. Reuben would not be able to do Yibam on any of those wives. And now we're going to just discuss the 15 arayas that every person is not allowed to marry. Bitay, one may not marry his daughter. Ubas bitay, one may not marry his granddaughter if it's from his daughter. Ubas benoi, one may not marry his granddaughter who is the daughter of his son. Bas ishtoi, one may not marry the daughter of his wife. What's the difference between his daughter and the daughter of his wife? We learned it a couple of weeks ago, is that the daughter of his wife means it's a daughter from a woman who he was married to. Bitoi, not bas ishtoi, is the daughter of a woman who he may have had a relationship with out of marriage. It's called bitoi manusasai. Ubas beno, or the daughter of his wife's son. Ubas bita, or the daughter of his wife's daughter. Chamoisai, his mother-in-law. Some of these arayas are difficult to imagine. Don't worry. Why from a second marriage? Why can't it be from a first marriage? Oh, you mean, yeah, but it also means his own children. It could mean his wife's children from him. No, that's bitoi manusasa. There's a different. Is bitoi, when it says bitoi, it means bitoi manusasa. Means it's the daughter of a woman who was conceived while not in a marriage, and bas ishtoi is
not a regular.
That's correct, and we're going to see it in the Gemara, because the Gemara is going to ask why did it list off bitoi manusasa before bitoi from his wife. The Gemara is actually going to discuss that. So bas ishtoi could mean his wife's daughter, but it could also mean his daughter that he had together with his wife. Correct. Okay. Ubas bino ubas bita chamoisai, his mother-in-law. The aim chamoisai, and his mother-in-law's mother. You see, it's good to be a yid, because the Rebbe Shalom is telling you don't marry the mother of your mother-in-law. Who would even dream? He would even nightmare of such a thing. But we get schar for it. Every day we get schar for not marrying our mother-in-law's mother. Just think of that.
Your mother-in-law back.
The aim chamav, or the mother of your father-in-law. Achaisai imai, your sister, who's only a sister because you share a mother but not a father. V'achois, your mother's sister. V'achois ishtoi, and the sister of your wife. And we know achois ishtoi is only a problem while your wife is alive. But once your wife dies, you are allowed to marry your wife's sister. The eishes achiv, and the wife of your brother, may imoi, even though you're only brothers from the mother, his wife is still usher to you. Even though there's no mitzvah of yibum, there's no mitzvah of yibum on achiv me'imoi. Okay, the eishes achiv shaloi hayabay lama. Eishes achiv shaloi hayabay lama is a very interesting situation. And this is as follows: Reuven was married, and he was married to, let's say, Leah, a total stranger to everybody, and he was nifter without children, and he had no brothers, so there was no to do yibum. But after Reuven died, Reuven got a brother because his parents were still alive, and they conceived and gave birth to another child. And Levi was born after Reuven died. Levi is not allowed to do yibum to Reuven's wife because it says ki yeshu achim yachtav. The mitzvah of yibum was only if both brothers were alive at the same time. But if Levi only came into existence after Reuven passed away, there is no mitzvah of yibum there. The chalasai and his daughter-in-law, her elu paidrus tzarisein, the tzaris tzarisein, min chalitza umin yibum atzay paida. V'chulam, and all of these wives, imesu oy mianu oy niskarshu, oy senimtu ailonis tzarisein mutaris. If any of these women, so for instance, Reuven's daughter is married to his brother Shimon, if she died, Rahman al-Islam, before Shimon died, or she made miyun, or Shimon divorced her, or she turned up being an islandess, so it was a mekach tos, then Tersei Mutarais, because when Shimon died, Shimon was only married to the one wife that was mutter to his brother Reuben. The example we gave that if one of the women if this erba was an islandess, then she doesn't passel her tzara. You can't use that example by because these are all people who already had children. By definition, if it's a mother-in-law, it must have had children already because that's your wife. So therefore, the example of islands won't work by those. Oisha miyanu. It doesn't. Miyun doesn't work by these women either, because once again, a miyun only applies by a kan. So Ketet Poiter is saying, we're running late, so I think we should stop. I'm just going to share one nice little word about an islandess. An islandess, if a man marries a woman and she turns out being an islandess, then she's not considered his wife because it's a mekach tos. So there's a whole shaila. If it's a mekach tos, only if it's kedushin, not nisuin. What if it's nisuin and he knows already? Maybe then it's over v'kibul, right? So it's relevant because what happened when Avimelech took Sarah? He said, now, I don't know the Lashon of Pasuk, but it says, now give back Sarah to her husband, ki ish navihu, right? I think that's what Hashem told Avimelech. Because he's a Navi. So the question, it's in the Parsha of Vayera? Okay, so let's see if I can find it. And the question is, oh, here it is. This is where it is. He says, give it back. Give her back because she's a married woman. What does a Navi have to do with it? The Teretz of Avimelech, Sarah was an islandess. So Sarah was an islandess. So Abraham Avinu, it's a mekach tos by Abraham Avinu. So she's not an Eshes Ish. On that, Hashem said, no, Kinavihu. He knew going into it that she was an islandess. So therefore, it's a good kedushin. So therefore, you have to give her back. Okay, let's stop here, and we'll finish off the Mishnah tomorrow. But Baruch Hashem, we at least got a haskalah on Masechah Yevamos. I'm sorry? Miyanu means she